Excellencies, distinguished representatives, ladies and gentlemen. It's my privilege to declare the pre-session of the Universal Periodic Review on the 23rd of November 2021 in Padua, Italy, open. I warmly welcome you all. Before we begin with the presentations of the international non-governmental organizations and the national human rights institutions, I would like to invite Professor De Stefani to make his welcome speech. Professor De Stefani is the Professor of International Law of Human Rights at the University of Padua and the Chief Coordinator of the Padova Model UPR. Professor, you may now take the floor.
Thank you and good afternoon and welcome to the fourth edition of the Padova Model UPR in Padova. It's a great pleasure for me to warmly greet all participants and congratulate them for being here today and for the excellent work you have already done so far in preparation for this simulation. This is the second year that the simulation takes place in virtual online mode, and for sure it will be another successful event. This session was created 4 years ago as a means to familiarize students with a relatively new procedure, a charter-based procedure for human rights protection, endowed with a unique combination of interesting features. The UPR combines elements of human rights reporting and interstate diplomatic dialogue. It is grounded on international legal norms and standards, but it also addresses the peculiarities of domestic legislations and policy. States are the key players in the UPR, but the procedure also calls for the involvement of civil society organizations around the whole procedural cycle. So a simulation of such a complex endeavor can develop a range of skills, including research, communication, and networking. I thank the many partners in this endeavor. First, the University of Padova, namely the Department of Political Sciences, Law, and International Studies, and her director, Professor Elena Piotti. The master's degree in Human Rights and Multilevel Governance, directed by Professor Sara Pennicino, and the US Center Antonio Papisca at the University of Padova, directed by Professor Gabriella Salviulo. The center is physically and virtually hosting all of us today and for the whole week. Then another fundamental key partner is the UPR branch of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva, in the person of his chief, Mr. Gianni Magazzini, to whom I will give in a minute the floor. And last but not least, UPR Info, an NGO based in Geneva, which is the leading entity in studying and providing resources for those who are involved in the UPR exercise everywhere in the world. The three, so the Human Rights Center, the UPR branch, and UPR Info, have recently signed an agreement to support this model and further develop it also in other universities. My warmest thanks, however, go to Dr. Ling Han and the incumbent secretariat of this model UPR for their immense work done so far and for the work that's still waiting for them in the next days. And also allow me to address a special welcome to Fia from the Twin University of Graz that miraculously managed to join us physically in Padova to mark our inter-university cooperation. So good work to everybody and have fun. And now is my pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Magazzini, Head Chief of the UPR branch at the Office of the Commissioner for Human Rights, Geneva. Thank you, Gianni, for joining. and you have the floor. Okay. Gianni probably had some trouble in joining us in this moment. Okay, so that's things that may happen. But I see that some people from the branch are already here, and probably the chief will join us later. And as soon as he comes, we can probably, with the help of the president, have a little of break in the flow of the game to give him the floor for a short speech of welcome again. So my task is ended here, and so it's my pleasure to give again the floor to the president, because now the fourth model UPR, the Padova Model UPR, begins. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. As all of you should know, the performance of each team, may it be the NHRIs, the NGOs, as well as the states team, are being evaluated during the simulation. For this, we also have 2 additional external evaluators, one of which is Ms. Nicoletta Sabile, from the UPR Info, as well as Ms. Laia Valls-Sentis from the UPR branch of the OHCHR. Be our external evaluators. I welcome you warmly. Thank you for taking your time. Before we start the presentations, I would like to briefly recall the modalities of the panel presentations and dialogues. Firstly, I would like to remind everyone to turn off their camera and turn off their microphone and to turn on their cameras. Furthermore, please change your name to NGO, NHRI, state, and then your name if you haven't done that yet. In case of a weak internet connection, and only after communicating the issue to the Secretariat, you are allowed to turn off your cameras for the improvement of the connection speed. If a participant faces audio or video issues during the pre-session, which persists for more than 2 minutes, we will give the floor to another representative of the organization to summarize the presentation. Or in lack of one, we kindly request the participant to call us via the Zoom phone number, which have been provided to you beforehand. For technical support, the participants might send a private message on Zoom to the Secretariat on the chat. The pre-session panel is also live streamed on YouTube. You can find the link on the website or in the chat. Feel free to share it with your institute, colleagues, and friends. We shall now begin with the panel presentations. The Universal Periodic Review recognizes the vital role of the national human rights institutions and non-governmental organizations to the reviewing process, as they provide additional clarification to issues concerning the human rights situation on the ground that might be raised during the working group sessions. First of all, international non-governmental organizations are called. Afterwards, there will be a short coffee break, and following that, the pre-session will proceed with the presentation of the national human rights organizations. Each presentation of the civil society organizations shall be carried out with a maximum of 10 minutes. Only turn on your microphone when you are given the floor. If you exceed the maximum speaking time, you will be cut off to avoid any delay in the procedure. We shall now proceed with the panel presentations, beginning with the representatives on the international NGOs. I will try pronouncing your names correctly. Please forgive me for any mistakes that I might make. First on the list is the Director of Global Advocacy for the Center of Reproductive Rights, Ms. Alice Menegatti. Okay, I've just heard that Mr. Magazzini, from the Chief of the UPR branch of the OHCHR, is now here. I would please ask him to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and sorry, I had a technical issue which eventually was resolved, but I'm very pleased to be with all of you this is a great opportunity for you to learn from inside the UPR mechanism, which, as you know, is in the final stages of the third cycle, having reviewed 181 states in this third cycle and maintaining from the very beginning of the setting up of the mechanism back in 2006, 100% participation. Why is this mechanism so important? Because frankly, it offers an opportunity for states to review each other with the benefit, the great benefit of the informed opinion of UN treaty bodies, special procedures mandate holder, other part of the UN system, as well as regional human rights organization, national human rights institution, and civil society organization, whose input is put together in documents that are presented next to the state report for the review in the working group. Now, you know that we have had huge challenges with COVID-19, so we had to adopt hybrid modalities, which nevertheless have allowed us to continue moving forward towards the end of this third cycle with the large participation of delegations from the state under review, as well as with an average of 100 states making recommendation to the state under review, on average 2.3, so over 200 recommendation, which basically means that in this third cycle, in spite of COVID-19, we have seen an increase in the number of recommendations made, an increase in the number of those that are supported by the state, and an increase also in the level of delegations participating in the review. One good model is when states will be presenting their participation in the review with the three branches of the government at the same table: a minister, a senator, a member of the Supreme Court. I would say that is a good model of engagement of the states as a whole through its three main branches of the government in the review itself. Another good practice, of course, is when we do something practical about implementation and follow-up. And in this third cycle, the High Commissioner has been quite active in sending letters to all the foreign ministers once the adoption of the outcome in the Human Rights Council item 6 takes place, which means once the state make a clear position on every received recommendation. And there, the good practices are those states that do action plan on human rights, at least with all the recommendation that they have accepted. Those that integrate those human rights action plan into the work for the sustainable development goals, targets, and indicators. And finally, those that make sure that there is closer participation in country when it comes to the implementation of recommendation from the parliaments that often are responsible for 50% of the recommendation received and or accepted by the states, to, of course, other line ministries, the judiciary, prisons administration, police, and so on and so forth. So looking ahead, as we are preparing for the fourth cycle, of course, we would like to see improved all those efforts at coordination and implementation at country level. And when it comes to the mechanism itself in Geneva, in the working group and in the adoption under item 6, we feel that the system in place it's working very well. What is important is the level of participation in the preparation of the reviews, and of course, the important voice of the civil society, other stakeholders, including independent national human rights institution, which of course through the so-called informal pre-sessions organized by UPR Info can have an important voice to be shared with delegation ahead of the review themselves. So I leave you here with a sense that these programs will give you very important tools for understanding and eventually utilizing effectively this mechanism, or preparing yourself to be part of it, either within the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights or as a member of delegations of the state or as a member of an organization, whether civil society or otherwise. So with those few words, thank you very much. And again, apologies for the delay in my joining you. I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much, Mr. Magazzini. So now we will proceed with the presentations. The first presentation will be held by Ms. Angelina Cvetkowska. She's the Senior Legal Advisor of the Center of Reproductive Rights. Ms. Cvetkowska, you will have 10 minutes. You may take the floor.
Thank you, Mrs. President. I just want to make sure that you can see my screen right now. Yes, okay. So thank you very much, fellow delegates, Mrs. President, Mr. Vice President, and the Secretariat. It is my pleasure to deliver the first presentation in the Model UPR. My name is Angelina Cvetkowska, and I am the representative from the Center of Reproductive Rights. Together with my colleague Alice Menegatti, we have prepared a submission on Argentina, United Kingdom, and Pakistan, analyzing the situation with terms of reproductive and sexual health in these three states. Briefly, before I start, the Center of Reproductive Rights is an international NGO. It is the only legal advocacy organization focused on the advancement of reproductive rights at the global level. We focus on transforming how reproductive rights are understood by courts, governments, and human rights bodies. And we have a critical role in securing legal victories before national courts, UN committees, and regional human rights organizations. Our work pertains generally to any issues relating to sexual and reproductive rights, and this includes a wide range of issues, as you can see on the slide. In our submission, as I said, we have analyzed in depth the sexual and reproductive rights records of three countries: Argentina, Pakistan, and Great Britain. With this presentation, we would like to briefly underline the positive steps taken by these countries, but also the ongoing challenges and ongoing violations of reproductive rights and how they can be improved. Starting with Argentina, the two positive improvements since the last UPR cycle that we have recognized, and the first one is extremely significant, is the passing of Law 27/610 on the voluntary access to termination of pregnancy. This has been a great change since the previous legislative framework under which abortion was criminalized. Right now, we have a law that allows the voluntary termination of pregnancy up to and including the 14th week of pregnancy, and later only in cases of rape, danger to the life or health of the person, of the pregnant person. This is a huge step forward in terms of protecting the rights of women, the rights to autonomous choices, liberty, life, and health. Another positive improvement during the COVID-19 pandemic has been the encouragement of outpatient treatment during times of hospital overcrowding and the access to medical abortions using misoprostol in accordance to WHO guidelines. Excuse the typo in the presentation. There are, of course, ongoing challenges that remain, and we have addressed these. These are particularly, 1 and 2 are particularly important in terms of the implementation of the new legislative framework on abortion. The first one is ensuring that abortion is accessible across public health institutions in all regions, decreasing the chances that a woman might need to pay for private healthcare or travel to other cities and regions in order to access abortion. And the second one is to work to minimize and eventually eliminate the negative effects of the decentralized healthcare system. by ensuring that federal law is equally implemented across the whole territory of Argentina, so that women across Argentina, regardless of whether they live in urban, rural areas, have equal access to abortion. Recommendations 3 and 4 relate to information and awareness raising across the society. 3 relates to informing women and the population on their rights to abortion and how they can access services, seeing that there is still a widespread stigma around abortion in Argentina. Number 4 relates to the awareness of medical workers in order to decrease the obstacle of conscientious objection. Number 5 is about overturning any charges and convictions based on the previous legislative framework which criminalized abortion. So we would like to see a reconsideration of all the cases where women have been prosecuted for the crime of abortion, which need to be now reconsidered in light of the new rights afforded by the new legislative framework. Now we're moving on to Great Britain, where we have also seen some positive developments, notably in terms of the abortion rights in Northern Ireland, where abortion was previously criminalized. In March 2020, there has been a new legislative framework which decriminalizes abortion in Northern Ireland. This is a huge step forward, also in terms of equalizing the rights of women across the UK, and obviously in terms of improving the rights and the reproductive rights of women in Northern Ireland. The challenges we have recognized here are mostly related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Due to the pandemic, 23% of key independent abortion providers had to shut down clinics in the UK, which meant that certain areas which are already deprived of abortion services in general have been left even more vulnerable. The solution to this is the provision of remote abortion services. This means that there are ways to provide abortion services without women physically going to clinics. And there has been, there has been a change in terms of allowing this type of remote services temporarily during the pandemic in England, Wales, and Scotland. However, under the current legal framework, this isn't legal. So at the end of March 2022, there will be no more provision of remote abortion services in the UK, meaning that the women who generally do not have an access to clinics will not be able to access remote abortion services. Therefore, what we propose is a change in the legal framework in the UK, and also a legal provision that allows remote abortion services of some kind in Northern Ireland, where currently no solution has been proposed to this issue created by the COVID pandemic and the shutdown of abortion clinics. Finally, we reviewed the situation in Pakistan, where the main issue we recognized is the issue of maternal mortality. There has been an improvement in terms of decreasing the maternal mortality rates due to the enhancement of health services and the raised awareness among women about pre- and postnatal care. There has also been a commitment by Pakistan to the 2030 agenda to further reduce maternal mortality ratio to less than 130 deaths per 100,000 live births. However, despite this, Pakistan is still one of the countries with the highest maternal mortality ratio, especially in rural areas. And this is due to unwanted pregnancies and unsafe abortions, because abortion is still illegal under the legislative framework in Pakistan. To resolve this, our center recommends the amendment of the existing legislative framework regarding abortion in order to ensure legal and accessible abortions under every condition, and creating internal mechanisms to monitor the implementation of this potential new law. The second recommendation relates to contraceptives. Fill the existing contraceptive supply gap by firstly improving imports in the country, but also improving the in-country distribution to make sure that contraception is available in every region in Pakistan, including rural areas. And thirdly, we recommend organizing trainings for medical staff, healthcare workers, and nurses to raise the awareness of the population of the root causes of maternal mortality and the possible alternatives of family planning that families can adopt. These are the 3 states that we have reviewed. With this, I conclude my presentation, and I would like to thank you for your time. Here are the contacts, places you can contact me or Alice Menegatti. And I hope that we have shown you the importance, highlighted the importance of reproductive health in terms of protecting the rights of women, their rights to freedom of discrimination, their rights to life, their rights to health, bodily autonomy, and so on, which are fundamental to the well-being of society and to protecting human rights in general. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Zwitkowska. Next, we will continue with Freedom House, presented by the president of Freedom House, Ms. Bhumani Ranasinghe. Ms. Bhumani Ranasinghe, you have 10 minutes. You may take the floor.
Thank you very much, delegates, fellow delegates. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Give me a moment to share my screen. I hope you can see my screen right now. Perfect. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Bhumani Ranasinghe. I am from the Freedom House, the Voice of America. We are making the stakeholder submission for the Universal Periodic Review, the 4th cycle. That's currently taking place. And we, in our research, we've looked into 3 particular countries. We've looked into India, Pakistan, and the Kingdom of Morocco. Let me give you an overview of what we do. Freedom House, the predominant aim of Freedom House is to defend democracy and freedom in the world. And particularly, we are focusing on the freedom on the internet, freedom of the press, and freedom of nations in transit, as well as freedom generally in the world. And we conduct our activities through training programs, targeted assistance, research, advocacy, monitoring to uplift democracy and independent media, as well as human rights and civil society participation around the world. And in the states that we have taken into consideration in our recommendations that we're making today, we have local stakeholders that we partner up with in gathering data and in ensuring that our research supplements the recommendations that we're going to make. In our presentation, I'm going to be focusing particularly on freedom of expression and information in the digital age. As you know, freedom of expression and information is a very vast area and crosscuts several other, almost every other human rights in the Bill of Rights. So we're going to particularly only focus on freedom of expression and information in the digital age due to time constraints. In our organization, we have an index where we measure the internet freedom status. And in 2021, 30 out of 70 countries that we assessed experienced a deterioration in internet freedom, where some countries were categorized as not free, some were partly free, and some were considered free. And we have different indicators that we've used in calculating this, the data here. And the fundamental objective of our presentation to choose the Republic of India, the Republic of Pakistan, and Morocco was particularly because the internet freedom status of these countries have been deteriorating since the COVID-19 pandemic and up until today. If you look at the recommendations of the UPR in the 3rd cycle for India, Pakistan, and Morocco, both the Republic of India and Pakistan had noted, obviously, the recommendations concerning freedom of expression and information, and Morocco has supported a recommendation of ensuring freedom of expression and association back during the 3rd cycle. So our presentation and our overview would be an extension of what we've used in our submission time period in our analysis of understanding how each of these states have encountered challenges both within the legal framework and outside of it in upholding freedom of expression and information in the respective territories. Let me start with the Republic of India. The Republic of India had several key issues concerning freedom of expression and information in the last year. If I may draw your attention to the farmer strikes that took place in early 2020. And since then, the legal framework which legislated several key laws that criminalizes freedom of expression and information, especially even civilian information that is shared through internet intermediaries. So currently there is a law in India which criminalizes employees working for some of these internet intermediaries if the government requests information from them and of personal IP address encrypted information of messengers. And if these employees do not provide this information to governmental authorities within 36 hours, they can be criminalized with a prison sentence for 7 years. In the view of such developments, particularly stark developments, in the internet freedoms domain, we've found out that people had also been detained and questioned, even if they were just mere civilians who are out on streets advocating for their freedom of their rights. And sometimes people who are targeted would also include environmental activists, women's activists, or any other activists who's working in the domain of human rights. So we, in our recommendation, would recommend that the state should ensure that all internet-related laws and practices adhere to international human rights law and standards respecting freedom of expression and information, ensuring that there is no impunity associated. And then if I move your attention to the Republic of Pakistan, there have been several challenges in the Republic of Pakistan, again, regarding the internet freedoms aspect for both human rights defenders and activists of all other calibers, particularly referring to the Pakistan Telecommunications Authority and its state censorship over information that is shared by specifically journalists and civilians. And in this regard, what we found out is that Article 19 of the Pakistan Constitution, which allows certain restrictions in the name of religion as well as governmental national security, has sometimes been used and utilized to further restrict internet freedoms of civilians. And in that sense, we recommend that the state should uphold freedom of expression and information by reforming Article 19 of the Constitution. And in light of the issues that we found out in Pakistan, we also understand that there are several issues of internet blackouts that the state has orchestrated, and we strongly believe that the state should uphold freedom of expression and information by reforming Article 19 of the Constitution. And if I also may draw your attention to the Kingdom of Morocco, the Kingdom of Morocco has had several issues pertaining to freedom of expression and information, particularly for Moroccans, both Moroccans living inside the country as well as Moroccans living abroad. As we all live in a digital world today, content creators, social media activists, or any type of civilian that simply uses their social media handle to share information that is a counter narrative to the ruling parties or the government's narrative has been detained in certain instances, and there is a new law that is being proposed by the government to criminalize Moroccans both living inside and outside of abroad if they promote information that inhibits the state's agenda. They can be repatriated and be criminalized and reprimanded in Morocco. In light of such developments, we strongly believe that the Moroccan state has to ensure freedom of expression and communication for all people in all forms of communication, particularly also referring to their commitments to the current ongoing discussions with regard to the Kingdom of Morocco and its commitments to the optional protocols and signing the optional protocols to the Bill of Rights as well. These, ladies and gentlemen, are the key 3 recommendations that we are making for the 3 states, the Republic of India, the Republic of Pakistan, and the Kingdom of Morocco. And in light of these 3 recommendations, we would like to reiterate that freedom of expression and information cross-cuts almost all other human rights within the Bill of Rights, particularly reaffirming that rights are indivisible and interconnected. And we strongly believe that states and delegates who are gathered here with us today would understand the concerns regarding to the freedom of expression, particularly on the internet medium. And I believe I have stuck to the time, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next presentation will be held by the Executive Director of Greenpeace, Ms. Chiara Schwärzmann. Ms. Chiara Schwärzmann, you have 10 minutes. You may take the floor.
Thank you, Ms. President. I hope you can all see the presentation. Distinguished President, delegates and excellencies, dear colleagues from civil society organizations and national human rights institutions. It's a privilege to have the opportunity to present Greenpeace International's perspective on pressing human rights issues in the states under review in today's pre-session to the UPR. At Greenpeace International, we expose global environmental problems, develop solutions for a green and peaceful future, and advocate for fundamental human rights. In today's statements, I would like to draw your attention to the most pressing environmental and human rights issues in 3 states under review. Namely, we will present problems related to air pollution in India, air pollution and the coal mining industry in Pakistan, and deforestation and indigenous rights in Argentina. The air pollution levels in India are amongst the highest in the world. In 2020, 15 out of 20 of the most polluted cities in the world were in India. But how is this related to human rights? Every day, the Indian population is exposed without their consent to hazardous substances in the air, increasing their likelihood of developing heart and pulmonary diseases, cancer, disabilities, and so on throughout their lives. Air pollution also drastically increases mortality. Alone in 2019, 1.67 million deaths could be attributed to air pollution in India. Just last week, we could once again observe how bad air pollution can get in Delhi, where schools and colleges had to be shut down due to toxic air quality levels. This constant exposure of the population to polluted air is alarming and seriously compromises the right to health, a safe and clean environment, and even the right to life. India has undertaken important steps to improve environmental policies since its last review. Both its efforts to move towards renewable energy and the introduction of the National Clean Air Program in 2019 are important steps in the right direction. However, the lack of enforcement of such policies and India's reluctance to phase out coal, as revealed again during the final negotiations at the COP26 just last week, are very concerning and will hamper India's climate ambitions. For this reason, we are calling on state representatives today to recommend to India to introduce stricter laws and enforcement of regulations on air quality. The National Clean Air Program should include all non-attainment cities, which is not the case right now, in its action plan and be legally binding for both authorities and polluters. India should also promote a decentralized model of renewable energy by replacing fossil fuels, especially coal, with renewable sources of energy. Moving on to Pakistan. Air pollution also poses serious problems in Pakistan, causing around 114,000 deaths per year. Children are particularly vulnerable to this, as 1 in 10 deaths in children under the age of 5 is caused by air pollution. The problem has become so serious that parents sometimes don't even take their children for a walk anymore because of the toxicity of the air. Despite these serious public health consequences of air pollution, only limited action to tackle the problem has been taken by the government so far, such as planting more trees. There is no clear and consistent policy for improving air quality. One important step would include moving away from fossil fuels and invest into renewable energy. The coal industry in Pakistan is one of the main contributors to air pollution, while accelerating climate change at the same time. However, moving away from coal is not only necessary for environmental and health reasons, but also because of the working conditions of miners. Since Pakistan is not party to the ILO Convention on Mine Safety, frequent coal mine disasters and accidents occur with detrimental consequences such as death. Alone in 2020, 208 people have lost their lives in mining accidents. Many more people develop serious health conditions due to constant exposure to mine dust, chemicals, and fuels, and lack of protection. Greenpeace therefore stresses the urgency to take immediate action to guarantee the right to health and life of the Pakistani population and mine workers, and urges state representatives to address the following recommendations to the state of Pakistan. First, to reduce the activity of coal-fired factories and uncontrolled diesel emissions, and start the transition to a green economy as soon as possible. Pakistan should also ratify the International Labour Organization Convention on Mine Safety. Moving on to Argentina. In July 2021, during an overflight of the Chocó province in Argentina, our local Greenpeace team discovered unlawful deforestation. Since November 2020, more than 10,000 hectares of forest have been illegally cleared. In fact, as a consequence of the COVID-19 related lockdowns, the deforestation has even increased by 80% compared to the previous year. This should be alarming for all of us for three main reasons. First, deforestation worsens climate change, which leads to extreme weather-related events such as droughts and severe storms, not only in Argentina, but all over the world. Second, deforestation contributes to air pollution and puts our right to a clean and healthy environment at risk. And third, deforestation seriously violates indigenous rights, and this is a point I would like to focus on a little bit more. Greenpeace regularly witnesses how indigenous people are violently forced to leave their land during the process of deforestation. Some might even be killed in the process. However, deforestation not only deprives indigenous people of their right to land, but also violates substantive rights such as the right to food, water, or health, as a result of this destruction of their home and livelihood. The issue of deforestation concerns us all and must be addressed without any further delay. As the representative of Greenpeace, I call on you, distinguished delegates, to address the following recommendations to Argentina. First, to invest in the restoration of destroyed and degraded forests. And second, to recommend the creation of a stronger enforcement and monitoring mechanism of the Forest Law 2007 to end deforestation in indigenous land and reduce emissions and limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is necessary to guarantee the right to health of current and future generations. This recommendation has been elaborated in collaboration with La Defensoría del Pueblo de la Nación and the Unrepresented Nations and Peoples Organization. We commonly agreed on the need to protect indigenous people by setting an end to deforestation and to guarantee a healthy future for future generations by reducing emissions that result from deforestation. Distinguished delegates and excellencies, human rights cannot be enjoyed without a safe, clean, and healthy environment. Greenpeace therefore wants to stress the importance of including environmental considerations in the human rights agenda, because this is the only way to guarantee a sustainable future for the next generation. Thank you very much for your attention, and then I'm looking forward to a successful UPR. Back to you, Ms. President.
Thank you, Ms. Schwarzmann. Next, we will hear from the Senior Policy Advisor from Oxfam, Ms. Florina Marietta Negu. You have 10 minutes, you may take the floor.
Thank you. I will share my screen now. I hope you can see it. Honorable Presidency, fellow delegates, I'm here on behalf of Oxfam International to present you our submission for this UPR. We decided to focus on human rights issues, but more importantly on the high level of inequality that women are facing in 3 different countries, South Africa, India, and Argentina, due to our commitment to eradicating gender-based violence. Regarding South Africa, Oxfam International is concerned about the high levels of inequality, but also the high numbers of reports of domestic violence, femicide, and rape in the country in the previous years. In addition, in many rural areas, there is still a harmful practice, ugudwala, that is practiced in this country, which involves abduction of women for marriage and also rape. But there is also a high level of intersecting inequalities, women suffering not only because of discrimination based on gender, but also race and other grounds. And although the country is trying to approve some legislative measures in order to counter these high numbers of reports, there is still inadequate protection for victims of gender-based violence, and a lot of cases remain unreported, or when women are reporting these cases to the authorities, unfortunately, there is not enough done for them. For these reasons, we urge South Africa to work on eradicating the harmful practice that we already mentioned, ugudwala, that it's still happening in a lot of rural areas. We also urge the authorities to develop public awareness campaigns to eliminate other traditional practices and stereotypes, because these are the ones who are perpetuating discrimination against women and gender-based violence. Also, to provide more resources and higher budgets for services for victims of violence, including for establishing shelters, for establishing other services, like, for example, legal and psychological counseling. Also, to strengthen the measures that are already taken to combat gender-based violence, but to provide educational programs in schools about human rights, about gender-based violence, and also sexual consent. And of course, we urge the state to adopt more efficient measures in order to eradicate violence against women throughout the country. Moving on to India, unfortunately here as well, Oxfam International is concerned about the high number of cases that involve domestic violence, sexual assault, trafficking, and also honor killing in the country. Unfortunately, there is a high level of insecurity of women in India, especially, for example, in public places or public transportation, because they are a target of sexual assault or sexual violence in these places. There is also still a practice of dowry-related deaths. Although dowry was forbidden by law in 1961, it's still being practiced in a lot of rural areas in the countries. And women are the ones who are dominating the unpaid care work system. And unfortunately, they are a target of violence due to not meeting the expectations of the other household members. And for this reason, we have a few recommendations. We urge India to, first of all, promote women's empowerment and ensure their equal participation in the work life. Also, we urge India to enact a women's reservation bill that it has been on the agenda of the government for several years, and it would really help to ensure women's political participation in all public institutions. We also propose more national awareness campaigns and educational programs to raise awareness about gender-based violence, and also once again to challenge the current gender norms and the current stereotypes. Also, similar to South Africa, we propose more sufficient resources and more higher budget that need to be put in place in order to implement more services for victims of violence, including, as mentioned before, legal and counseling support, but also shelters, in order to offer this equal access for victims. Also, to develop an effective system to monitor the implementation of the current legislation, because measures are not enough if there is not a proper monitoring system in place. Also, we urge the state to eliminate these practices of in order to prevent the dowry-related deaths and honor killings. As we saw in terms of dowry-related deaths, forbidding it by law, it's not gonna stop the practice. Therefore, we really propose this recommendation for the state, and also last but not least, to ratify the optional protocol for the Convention for Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And last but not least, we also analyzed the situation in Argentina. First of all, we want to mention that we recognize the efforts that Argentina has been making the last few years in order to protect women in terms of national strategies and legislative measures, especially in a context where there is a high number of movements, of women's rights movements in the country. In the region itself. Unfortunately, we still see, especially in the last 3 or 4 years, we see an increasing number of femicides and cases of violence against women, including rape and domestic violence. Unfortunately, this situation has been exacerbated by the current pandemic and also by the restrictions related to COVID-19 that the state has been implementing in the past 2 years, because women are finding themselves in a vulnerable position in the context of this pandemic due to the existing gender inequalities. And analyzing the situation, analyzing the high number of cases also provided by other organizations, but also by the authorities, we realized that although there are a lot of legislative measures in place, there is a gap between these measures, between these strategies that are implemented and the high number of cases that exist. Therefore, we urge Argentina to analyze this situation, and also we have some recommendations for the authorities. First of all, to take into consideration this high level of vulnerability that women are finding themselves in when there are implemented restrictions regarding the current pandemic. Furthermore, to give more visibility to women and to families who are actually challenging these gender norms, because as mentioned before, stereotypes and gender norms are perpetuating violence against women. Also to develop more public awareness campaigns and educational programs similar to recommendations made to the other countries, because it's important, especially in the educational system, to address this problem of violence, gender-based violence. Also, to give women the opportunity to get involved in these strategies. As mentioned, there are a lot of national strategies implemented, but women should not be seen only as victims, but also as actors of change, and they could contribute to adopting these legislative measures and these national strategies to the actual situation. And of course, to address the existing unequal power relations through the national strategies. We know that national strategies have been put in place, also trainings for the authorities, but unfortunately, these power relations still exist and they are affecting women and their situation overall. Thank you for listening. This was our report, and of course, if you have any questions about the recommendations, I also left my contact and also the contact of the head of research, and we really hope that the states are going to take them into consideration and other states will support it as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gu. Next, I invite Ms. Luisa Sartori Costa, the Global Child Protection Director at Save Children. Okay, I hear.
Thank you. Do you hear me?
Yes. Please wait until I give you the floor. You have 10 minutes. You may take the floor now.
Okay, thank you. Dear Madam President and fellow delegates, good afternoon. It is a pleasure to it's a great pleasure for Save the Children to be here today. I'm Luisa Sartori Costa, Global Child Protection Director at Save the Children International, and today I will present to you our concerns regarding the situation of children's rights in Pakistan, India, and Argentina. But first, I will try to introduce a little bit of our organization. Save the Children 1919 in response to the terrible suffering of children during the First World War. We put the most vulnerable children first through the provision of life-saving protection for all children around the world. We aim at ensuring that children have healthcare, food and shelter, learning opportunities, and child protection services available to them. We are deeply committed to help all children achieve their full potential, growth, and development. Now, I will present to you our concerns regarding children's rights in Pakistan, India, and Argentina. In Pakistan, we recognize the important advancements on the protection of children's rights in the country, but there is still much to be done in order to ensure children will develop and grow, having all their rights guaranteed. More than 1/3 of Pakistan's population is between 0 and 14 years of age, and 38% of children under 5 are affected by stunted growth, and the country has a high mortality rate. We identify as causes of this situation the lack of an effective health and basic sanitation systems, the lack of a reasonable nutritional plan, and an immunization system based on gender, geographical area, and socioeconomic conditions, which leads to discrimination and exclusion of vulnerable children from immunization campaigns. This scenario requires urgent action. Early childhood is an extremely important phase for children's development, causing lifelong impacts on children's lives. In face of this situation, we would like to recommend the state of Pakistan to fully implement the expanded program for immunization, ensuring basic vaccination programs become compulsory during childhood and are followed by every family. Also, to consider the implementation of the national sanitation policy, first and foremost, in more vulnerable areas, ensuring children will have access to sanitation services and avoiding preventable disease outbreaks amongst vulnerable children. And lastly, to promote programs aimed at providing protection for children, especially with regards to care services, to healthcare services, guaranteeing a healthy and nutritious growth for children, and with the objective of eradicating forced marriage and forced religious conversion. Save the Children supports all the concerns that will be raised by the Unrepresented Nations and Peoples Organization and by the National Commission for Human Rights Pakistan throughout their presentations, as we have worked together. Regarding India, India has the largest children population in the world, and we recognize the great challenges that come from this. We welcome the important advancements on the protection of children's rights in the country, but we are still concerned with the rates of child labor and child marriage in India. Regarding child labor, Save the Children welcomes the enactment of the Child Labor Prohibition and Regulation Amendment Act in 2016, which contributed to fostering children's rights protection. However, there are still more than 10 million children between 5 and 14 years of age subjected to child labor. Children in India engage both in hazardous forms of work as well in works in family enterprises, which could seem harmless. However, irrespective of the nature of work, children's development is affected by labor as well as their rights to leisure, rest, and education, among others, that are violated. Regarding child marriage, India has 1/3 of the world's child brides, and 27% of Indian girls before 18 years of age. Even with the Prohibition Child Marriage Act of 2006, thousands of girls are subjected every year to forced early and child marriage. Urgent action is needed here again. Child marriage leads to a continuum of harmful practices and human rights violations, depriving girls from education and increasing their vulnerability to poverty and to physical and sexual violation, including subjecting girls to forced sexual relations within marriage and to marital rapes. Therefore, based on the data showed, we, Save the Children, recommend the State of India to ratify the ILO Protocol of 2014 to the Forced Labor Convention of 1930, and to develop a specific plan to improve the surveillance of industry that traditionally and knowingly employ and exploit child labor. To consider to amend the Child Labor Prohibition and Regulation Amendment Act and remove the exemption to after-school work in family enterprises, ensuring that the after-school period will be protected and devoted to rest, leisure, studying, and children. To implement specific measures to ensure local and municipal compliance with the Prohibition Child Marriage Act, considering the development of measures that combat local, cultural, and religious traditions that support child marriages. And finally, to amend the Section 375 of the National Penal Code and remove the non-criminalization of marital rape, therefore criminalizing marital rape against married children aged between 15 and 18 years. Finally, addressing the situation in Argentina, Save Children recognizes also the important advancements on the protection of children's rights, especially the continuation of socioeconomic programs aimed at alleviating the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, we note with concern that the inequalities among its 24 different jurisdictions deeply impact the protection of children's rights. 29% of the population is between 0 and 17 years of age, and around 8 million children are living in poverty in Argentina. We remain deeply concerned about children's nutrition, health, life conditions, and education. The lifelong consequences to their growth and development caused by poverty and inappropriate living conditions cannot be ignored. We recognize the drastic impacts on child poverty and education caused by the COVID pandemic. School closures and distance learning critically impacted children's education and have led to increasing dropout rates. We are deeply concerned that children will not go back to school. Save the Children highlights a special concern regarding indigenous children, who face even higher challenges and development impairments. Even before the pandemic, they lacked access to education, healthcare, and sanitation systems. The lack of bilingual education is a serious factor threatening indigenous children's development. Special attention should be paid to them. In face of the increasing child poverty in Argentina, and bearing in mind the consequences of not having children, we recommend the state of Argentina to consider removing conditionalities linked to the universal allocation per child, ensuring the universality of the program, and more effectively reducing poverty levels in the country. To continue the implementation of the emergency family income, encouraging the families who benefit from it to send their children back to schools, and to develop a national plan to ensure all children will return to school until the end of 2022, with special attention to indigenous children and their need for bilingual educational system in the country. Save Children supports and endorses all the concerns that will be raised by the unrepresented nations and people's organization in their presentation, as we have worked together. Dear Madam President and fellow delegates, we are sure that our concerns will be taken into account by the fellow representatives of the states present here today. We remain available for further clarifications and conversations. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Tori Costa. Next, and for our last presentation for this first part of the pre-session day, we will hear from Ms. Lavinia Rotundi. She's the General Secretary of the Underrepresented Nations and Peoples Organization. Ms. Rotundi, you have 10 minutes. You may now take the floor.
Honorable President, Vice President, Secretaries, fellow delegates of states and fellow representatives of NGOs and national human rights institutions, I'm poised honored to discuss with you worldwide human rights situations to be urgently improved. I'm Lavinia Rotundi, representing the Unrepresented Nations and Peoples Organization with my colleague Elena Girelli, and on the occasion of the Padova Model Universal Periodic Review 2021, we decided to draw attention to human rights violations affecting particularly children belonging to ethnic, indigenous, and religious minority groups within Pakistan, Kingdom of Morocco, and Argentina. First of all, a brief introduction on our NGO and its main values. AMPO is an international movement and organization established to empower the voices of unrepresented and marginalized peoples worldwide and to protect their rights to self-determination. It has been entirely built and funded by its members, currently counting 60, all committed to respect the 5 principles laid down in the AMPO Covenant: non-violence, human rights, democracy and self-determination, environmental protection and tolerance. As concerns Pakistan, AMPO focused on the violations of the right to the child's liberty and the right to education and non-discrimination. Pakistan ranks 6th worldwide in terms of the absolute numbers of children married, especially girls. In 2020, 18% of girls had been married before 18 and 4% before 15. The Child Marriage Restraint Act 1929 prohibits the marriage of a boy before 18 and the marriage of a girl before 16. It doesn't prohibit all child marriages and violates Article 1 on the Convention on the Rights of the Child, defining a child as anyone under the age of 18. Furthermore, forced child marriage and forced conversion disproportionately affect girls of Christian, Sikh, and Hindu minorities. Approximately 2,000 girls from religious minorities are forcibly converted to Islam every year. No legislation criminalizes forced religious conversion. Neither access to justice is effective due to frequent prejudices. As a form of violence against children, child marriage and forced conversion through child marriage require urgent action by Pakistan to end impunity. The Pakistani public school system is still intolerant of religious minorities. Frequently, children from religious minority groups are exposed to a public shaming of their religious and cultural identity, particularly Christians and Hindus. Public school textbooks negatively and stereotypically portray religious minorities, while mostly promoting an Islamic-centered perspective. Schools should create a safe environment where the child's personality, talents, mental and physical abilities can be developed to their fullest potential. Instead, the experience of routinely harassment, intimidation, and bullying can significantly damage the child's well-being. The teaching of biases within the education system promotes a larger culture of religious discrimination that has major repercussions on the opportunity available to them in the future as regards to employment, higher education, and safety. Overall, other than supporting the recommendations of Save the Children and Greenpeace, AMPO urges Pakistan to effectively implement and amend the Child Marriages Restraint Act 1929, raising the minimum age of marriages for both girls and boys to 18 and ensuring its primacy over any personal laws. To take all necessary measures of prevention and to develop adequate legislations in the issue of forced conversions and marriages, with special regard to children belonging to religious minorities, and to enforce complaint procedures and accountability mechanisms to ensure that the Pakistani public school system represents a safe environment for children and protects them from religious discrimination. As concerns Morocco, AMPO focuses on the violations of the right to education and the protection from violence. Especially in Western Sahara, the educational experience of the Sharawi students is characterized by physical and emotional abuses and continuous discriminatory practices, especially when openly sharing their culture. Assyrian language is not tolerated. Even the Sharawi history, culture, or geography are totally avoided, denying the right to cultural heritage of minority groups. Moreover, Moroccan law enforcement forces inside and around secondary schools contribute to a sense of terror and intimidation. This condition prevents children from having an adequate education in a safe environment. Consequently, the number of children dropping out of school is considerably high. Also, Sharawi children are exposed to regular violence through direct and indirect forms. Besides the constant violence and discrimination in schools, day and night raids into Sharawi houses are frequent without legal documents or warrants. Arbitrary detention and violence perpetrated by security forces against Sharawi children are considerable. They are constantly subjected to sexual harassment and serious physical assaults. All these activities do not respect the safety and integrity of the child. Overall, UNPO made to Morocco the following recommendations: to take all necessary measures to provide Shirawi students with an adequate and safe educational environment, including preventing and avoiding all discriminatory practices, guaranteeing an educational program that respects the child's cultural heritage, to improve the legal and institutional frameworks, outlawing all the violent and discriminatory practices, and implementing all required measures to prevent any violation in compliance with obligations under the Conventions of the Rights of the Child, to adopt measures to investigate and hold accountable any state agent involved in the harassment, assault, or arbitrary detention of any Shirawi child. As concerned Argentina, UNPO focused on the violations of the right to health and the right to education. The health condition where indigenous communities live is highly problematic. They experience health issues as a direct consequence of pollution from resource extraction on their lands. Mapuche children are even more negatively affected due to the lack of drinking water and are subject to health issues that can lead to learning disabilities, progressive eyesight loss, painful joints, handling complaints, and high levels of heavy metals in their blood and urine. All these circumstances violate the right to the best health care possible, clean water to drink, healthy food, and a clean and safe environment to live in. Then indigenous languages are usually excluded from the public education system. The lack of bilingual system in schools can lead to the loss of the indigenous language and can cause serious difficulties for children to fully develop their learning capabilities. Furthermore, indigenous children have to deal with serious troubles related to educational barriers, since they usually live in highly poor conditions, forcing them to work instead of studying. The Argentinian government does not guarantee the fulfillment of the needs of Mapuche children yet. The lack of education to all indigenous students, regardless of their socioeconomic status, violates the right to education. Overall, other than supporting the recommendations of Save the Children and Greenpeace, UNPO made to Argentina the following recommendations: to implement all required measures to provide all indigenous students with an adequate education, including programs aimed at preserving and transmitting the cultural heritage of the Mapuche community, to guarantee education to all indigenous children, regardless of their socioeconomic status, by improving policies, to take all necessary measures to avoid any dangerous living conditions that could be harmful to the child's health. So thank you very much for your attention. We remain available for further clarifications, and we believe that impunity for violations of children's rights should come to an end as soon as possible. And the Universal Periodic Review offers us a great opportunity to improve the effective implementation of human rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Rotundi. And thank you all for your insightful presentation. Before we proceed with the presentations of the national human rights institutions, we will have a short coffee break until 3 p.m. I kindly request everyone to be back on time so we avoid any delay. See you later.